Welcome back to On Patrol Podcast, episode 36. I'm Wyndehurst Productions, joined with...
Fightin Kentuckian.
And we are happy to be back with another episode. I'm feeling much better than the last time. But before we get into the episode and what it's all about, as always, we like to start with alibis, caveats, and piggybacks. So last episode, we talked about AI in the hobby space. I had the flu, so I was not on screen and kind of only sort of participated in the conversation. Some of the negative, we had very surprisingly little negative feedback. The most of the negative feedback I feel like was around, you guys aren't experts, so why should I listen to you? As opposed,
true of anything,
right? And we tried to set that out in the beginning, and their opinion was, you can't insulate looking at AI as just a how it affects the hobby. And I don't think we did. I think we tried to talk that there are bigger issues, but we're even less equipped to talk about those issues. So let's just talk about kind of how it affects the hobby. But generally, I don't think anyone... I think we got a lot less negative feedback than the poll, Kentuckian had originally posted about people's use. So I was pretty surprised about how well it was received. And again, we always love talking to experts in the hobby. So I really enjoyed it despite being sick. But Kentuckian, what otherwise caveats and piggybacks do you have from last episode?
No, just huge shout out to Travis and Alan. I think that we got people that were genuinely good human beings that I think came from kind of opposite positions on the matter. And although there were some variables, like we talked about, how long Travis spends editing videos and those things, it was just it was a really interesting take. And to hear other people's kind of concerns, to me, it's like anything nowadays. I think conversation should just happen. And there's one way that it's a good teacher if you're open-minded and you're talking to people, and there's just things you didn't know were concerning that are concerning. And we've tried not to shy away from those, and we've wanted to have those conversations kind of here because we think we can do it, I'll say, in enough of a friendly environment. That way, me and Wyndehurst like to rib each other all the time and talk smack and stuff, but we try to do it normally in a kind of a brothers hitting on each other way. And the sense with having these conversations is just like, hey, why don't we think about something differently? So just can't thank those guys enough. The conversation was just going on a long time. And there were some really good points made that we glossed over, even a bunch of notes that we had and we wanted to get into discussions with. But 3 or 4 hour podcasts we're long. We're on the long end anyways, and we didn't want to make it that much longer. There's a lot of stones to uncover. And I think as AI progresses in the hobby, there's going to be stuff that continues to come up, and how do we address it? And is there going to be anything unified in the wargaming hobby space? Are we going to be all over the place? For instance, my bolt action league is wrapping up here in Virginia. We got up to 20 plus players. I think we're in them with like a strong high teens. But every year I have the players submit, 2 to 3 pictures of their armies, and I just shared them the other day, and they vote on, best painted, best theme, those things. And I had a player submit a picture with basically the army was there, but they had spruced it up with AI kind of in the background. And I was like, oh, that's not something I had to consider. And when we're casting votes for best painted, I just make all the players from all over the state, and even in, as far as they come, kind of vote on this stuff. I was like, maybe I should have been more intentional with that. So I kind of made a note when I put it out there, like, hey, I'm leaving this picture in. I didn't prohibit it, but I added a picture of their army on the tabletop when it was playing me one time, just so people could get a better look. But I do think it's something like I just need to be mindful of. You can disagree with me all day long. I might be a piece of crap to you. I think people sometimes when we disagree, the person's not a horrible human being. Maybe they are in some occasions, but I think just keeping that communication opening. We're still going to attack some of these controversial topics and just try to get more kind of insight from what the rest of the hobby space is thinking.
Yeah, and I think the big takeaway from that episode wasn't, hey, here's all the ins and outs, but we had two individuals who at the end of it both were like, you know what, the other side has good points. The kind of at the beginning, like, no, I'm straight against it. I was like, oh no, there's actually some really good reasons to use it. And the guy who's like, I use it all the time is like, wow, you have some really good points in times where I really would not want other people using AI in the hobby space.
Yeah.
And I think that was what we wanted to get at. Like, because when the whole, like what really drove the desire for the episode was my level of ignorance, and someone got mad at me and I was like, listen, you're mad about all this stuff. I don't even know the drama around AI at the time.
Yeah.
So, and no, neither of our guests, I think, were bad people because of their views
No,
on
they were. We picked them because they were great people. We
yeah.
knew of them both kind of outside of
So,
the.
regardless of their stance on AI, they're worth being listened to and considered. So I think it was good.
Yeah, for sure. No, so again, I would just say my last before we even begin the introduction of the episode is when you have thoughts or questions on it, like please just engage us. We're not out here claiming to be Sherpas. We might be point men, right? We might step on the claymore first, but definitely give us your comments and kind of feedback on that. I've had a lot of good kind of since that episode, and even though I think the poll was like 70-30 people against AI, and our high 60s to a little over 30, something like that. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. What we're here to talk about today with episode 36, I'm looking at Wyndehurst to make sure I'm right. Episode 36 of the On Patrol podcast, we're going to talk about basically, again, bringing a historical tabletop battle to the tabletop. Bringing a historical battle to the tabletop. And we've done 2 episodes on this so far. I just want to make the listener aware. Remember, Point Pleasant and Lexington and Concord, and we're going to get into that. And I really look forward to you guys kind of following us along with this episode and hearing your thoughts. I know a bunch of you have them. But this episode 36 is going to be the attack on Redoubt 10 at Yorktown in October. Let me make sure I have I don't want to mess this up. October 14th. I'm not looking at anything right now. And I'm going to say it's 1781, if I remember correctly. Okay, I think that's right. Wyndehurst is going to fact check me there. I didn't put that in my note, and I should have. But, yeah, so we're talking about Alexander Hamilton's attack on Redoubt 10. That's going to be the focus of the episode, bringing that to life on the tabletop. How do you do it? Rules, miniatures, table space, size, scenarios, comments, and kind of just making that come to life. So without further ado, please grab your spear, your shield, your belt-fed machine gun, and for this very special episode, your tricorn hat and your musket for this episode of On Patrol. So I will kick it over to Wyndehurst to get us started, and we'll be moving out with the first section.
Thanks, Kentuckian. Yeah, so our first section, we're going to talk about kind of the inspiration of the project. And like Kentuckian said, we've done 2 episodes where we talk about the process that guys have taken to take a historical battle and how to make that onto the tabletop. And I think we really got inspired when we talked about the Battle of Lexington, first because it was during the, this year, 250th anniversary of our country, and that was like the first battle. But it was a really unique look at taking a very challenging battle to do on the tabletop and a really interesting way of how to do that. And so we kind of wanted to bookend, that started the war. So this Battle of Yorktown kind of finishes the war. So we wanted to kind of, bookend that and honor, pay homage to the 250th anniversary. And then with doing that, so obviously an AWI game, and then, okay, we've talked to 2 individuals, 2 groups about their process. Let's try and implement what we've learned from them and then talk about our experience in that process. So that was kind of, I think, the big overarching inspiration for this project. Kentuckian, you want to add anything on to that?
The only thing I want to say, because I know some AWI person is going to beat us up, especially, so I checked the date is right. And then we were joking, me and Wyndehurst knows that the Lexington Concord's 251 years, 1775, because me and him had joked even during that episode that we had picked a battle before the 250th. We're like, oh, we missed it by a year. It's 250th. So yeah, I co-sign everything Wyndehurst said. It was, um, inspiration was kind of like, yes, this would be awesome if we did the final infantry fight. One of them, one of the more famous ones before the surrender, and then we'd started, early several months ago with kicking it off. So nothing. I think you nailed inspiration. Like that was what we wanted to do.
Yeah,
So
and just
go
to
ahead.
add real quick, before we start recording, Kentuckian had mentioned that this is a battle he neither of us have really seen anybody play because it's always kind of on the periphery of a bigger battle. And I think a lot of times when we want to, the inspiration that comes for bringing a specific battle to the tabletop is sometimes its uniqueness and the fact that other people haven't done it, and or that there might be a challenge. So I think that was something you said at the beginning that I think was also maybe a factor. Is like, well, it bookends the end of the war, and nobody's really done just it. Can we do that?
Yeah. No, and he's right on that. I think we'll peel that back a little bit more as we get into rules and inspiration, but specifically the research of it. I went to the research of this project. We've always asked people, like, and if you harken back to our episode with Paul, or you harken back to our episode with Jeff and Newman, the our Chris, you basically, people have talked about like, okay, if you're going to dive into this battle, we need to get the Osprey. We need to kind of get well read about this. Like, what does it look like? What are we looking at forces? A brief synopsis of kind of the places I went. Went to Yorktown 3 times in the last year. Went specifically to Redoubt 10 2 of those times. Went to the U.S. Army Infantry Museum. They had an awesome diagram over the topography where they did the Battle of Bunker Hill in the first room, and then they did the Siege of Yorktown, and they kind of had a small video about the attack on Redoubt 10. Watched several of the history, famous YouTube history channels on the battle. Found some awesome articles, well written articles on the battle. So, and then I own the Osprey for the fortresses, which has a bunch of references. I think it's like American War of Independence, French and Indian War fortresses, and as well as the troop types kind of from Yorktown and the final little last there. So I'd say me and Wyndehurst shared these resources back and forth, and we felt pretty confident, I'd say, in our kind of level of knowledge. And so a brief synopsis of kind of what's going on is there's I wouldn't say it's a ridge line, but there's these 2 redoubts that are having some of the high ground where, as Cornwallis is getting bottled up at Yorktown, they can't really fire their heavy artillery on the town just yet. And again, the noose is tightening, right? You just think of Mel Gibson standing up against the redoubts, right? They're bottling up Cornwallis, and so it comes to the decision of like, hey, we have to take these 2. We've got to stop and basically isolate Cornwallis and continue to get our artillery in on that town. And so I'm not going to get into too much on the specifics of, there's a lot of debate. I found a lot of secondary sources on basically the French, the American assault, and there's some gamesmanship, and there's a lot of stories, tertiary and third-hand stories about Alexander Hamilton, who would be famous for obviously the duel, the musical, and the Federalist Papers. But there's a lot of stories about some gamesmanship going on there to be able to lead the assault on Redoubt 10 and the Americans. I kind of left all that in the periphery just based on the time we had in this project, and we'll get back to that time. I really just wanted to get down to brass tacks, the commanders, and what was going on, and what did we see in the forces. And so as we're doing this, and me and Wyndehurst are going back and forth, we're seeing, hey, there's the Continental Force, the American force, has about 400. There's about 70 British in the Redoubt 10 with 1 gun, and there's even, if you're in Virginia, you can get great vantage point of the Redoubt. But I did not know this until I started researching. At the Carlisle War College in Pennsylvania, there is a 1-to-1 scale replica of Redoubt 10. at the United States Army War College. And so it was interesting to use some of those reference pictures as well. And then so in going into all that research and kind of figuring out, okay, here are the forces, what's going on, what is Hamilton doing? How is he leading these guys? How are they making the attack? And, even the videos I've sent Wyndehurst where the United States Army Museum gives you a very good topographical, like, hey, here's the column moving out. Hamilton is ordering his, 400 light troops, Marines, a kind of some mix in there, to not load their weapons. I'm so scared of, in the military, we call it a negligent discharge. So we're not going to load our weapons. We're going to go in there and we're going to overrun them. And, have you seen from some of our games we posted online, the little abattis and the kind of cribbing and the branches that they have in front of the redoubt? We're going to get the sappers to chop through this stuff, and we're going to overtake the fort, surround it, and just immediately. So in this research, you discover that the battle lasts about 10 minutes with, I brought up the original stats. Obviously a lot of British are cut down and end up surrendering, but the continental casualties are just amazing in the amount that are not. It's like 9 killed is what I'm seeing from, and I will say, even looking through resources, I found several different numbers, but it's looking like 9 killed, around that, 10 to 9 killed, and 25 wounded in capturing the redoubt. So if you think about just a 400-man dog pile onto this redoubt that is going to remove that, the British position, and then give the Americans the ability to now shoot into Yorktown. It's pretty amazing. I just want to side note, I have a good best friend that's a French national, and going to the site and seeing Redoubt 9 and seeing where the French took over, there's a huge bronze plaque, and I sent him a picture of it, that just gives thanks to the Frenchmen that died, in fighting for the liberation of the United States of America. And so it was, or the freedom of the United States of America. So it was really cool to see that and see kind of the pincer movement and the attacks on the both redoubts, and kind of how it broke down that night. And I just wanted to say that for reference. We spent absolutely no time kind of researching that, and we'll get into when we talk a little bit more about this project. But I wanted to give the viewer or listener who might not have any understanding of, I think me and Wyndehurst looked into this, and we thought about, what we could do in the amount of time. We were like, hey, we'd have to do something small skirmish, and we were talking like Redoubt 10 would be cool. We knew Hamilton was the commander. We're like, oh, that's very topical, and that's kind of interesting. So let's get more into that. The only thing else I want to mention on some of the research there were several references about who were the British that were garrisoning it. And I thought it was very interesting that when you have historians or painter artists, historians paint stuff, like Peter Dennis, Don Trani, some of the names we really know that have just painted a lot of, Ospreys or whatever. They have their own, Don Trani's got his own, I'm sure I'm not saying that name right, his own like North American book. And I use that as a good reference. But all the British I saw, and I think if anybody goes to the Fightin Kentuckian Facebook or the albums, I always try to put a picture of the attack when I'm playing the historical scenario. And there's one with like British Grenadiers, and there's one with like British Regulars, and there's one with like Highlanders. I think the Osprey Fortress one has like Highlanders. So I did find a few mixed reports, but that didn't, I won't say we dove too much into having the exact replica of regiments and facing colors and everything that was there. We really wanted to, and based on time allotted, get into the nitty gritty. What are the general historically accurate reports saying about the assault and the attack, and then how can we basically replicate that on the tabletop? So that's what I would say is the biggest for research of the project, kind of the background to the history. Any thoughts on that, Wyndehurst?
Yeah. So honestly, guys, Kentuckian did the lion's share of the research on this project, and it was hugely helpful having, on a project like this, having a member who can actually go to the site, and look at it and be like, all right, here's the cliff that's on the side where they came up through the woods on the flanking attack, or here's kind of the general size of the Redoubt, or here's the distance it is from 9. Because honestly, at the beginning, when we were looking at forces in our collections, I was trying to convince him to let me do the attack on 9 because I got a lot more painted French, and he's like, "You will not do the French assault for the 250th birthday." You
Fair,
have to
fair.
do the American assault. So I was going, okay, okay. But we had all that information because Kentuckian, he did a lot of work. Maybe not as much work as some people would have wanted us to do, but he did a lot of work, his due diligence in trying to get the information
In the time that we had, I'll say
right
I put some
in
time
the
into
time
it.
that we had, and sending it to me. So I didn't have to worry too much about it. It's just read what he sent, look at the pictures, kind of make decisions based off that. And so it is, I think, if you ever are trying to do a project like this and you have the opportunity for someone in the project to go to the site, it, even not having been the one who went there, but just the photos he was able to provide. And yes, you can look at photos online, but having somebody who could go see it and then talk me through what was actually there and what the photos don't convey, I think really helped inform some of the decisions we ended up making as we talked about, and we'll get into it when we talked about how we tweak the rules, how we set up the table and everything. So that's I think a huge boon if you ever have the opportunity to do that. Don't pass that opportunity to go to the site.
No, yeah,
Um,
well said.
yeah, so I think that was great. So then moving on, we want to talk about the rules and kind of the scenario and how we got to the friction of the engagement. Yeah, so the core rules were actually recommended to us by Paul. It's Whites of Their Eyes, and the supplement
Uh,
is,
Habitants, and Highlanders is the core.
sorry, yeah, Habitants and Highlanders is the core, and Whites of Their Eyes is the supplement for the AWI. And the core rules is French in any war, if I'm correct,
Yep,
right, Kentuckian?
yep, yep.
And this is the same rule set that Paul used for his Lexington Concord battle. And so when we're thinking about rules, muskets and tomahawks is already a rule set that we have reviewed, that we know really well and does cover this period. So some people might ask, well, why didn't you pick that set of rules? And part of the decision I think that went into picking this rules is we're trying to book in the conflict. And if Paul's game starts it with Lexington Concord and this set of rules, we thought it'd be interesting to try those sets of rules, which he spoke very highly of, to end it. And it's an older set of rules. It's from like the mid to early 90s, I think. Is that right, Kentuckian?
Yep, yep.
And games back then are very different. If you've never played an older game, this is like one of the first ones for me. I'm one of the, compared to our guests and even Kentuckian, I'm a newer war gamer, even though I've been doing it for 20 plus years. So I don't have the experience of some of those really old rule sets, and they are built different. And some people have asked us, why don't you pick older rules and stuff? And usually we try to only rules review ones that are in print that can be supported, because we're trying to support the hobby and the industry as well. This is available, but it's not really like a supported set of rules. So we thought this would be a good opportunity to get a rule set like this out. Um, it also, after playing through it, it almost feels like the ancestor of version one of Muskets and Tomahawks.
I think I would have to say, the one thing that I noticed when we started posting the pictures of our playthroughs and those things are people were like, man, I used to burn that up in the 90s. Um, I can't tell you, I've played convention games before Muskets and Tomahawks with French Indian War, and I couldn't tell you, most of those con games, I'm adolescent and, I'm kind of rolling dice and the GM or somebody who knows is walking you through, if you played a con and you're not familiar with the rule set and you're just kind of like, okay, I know this is a good strategy. Like, is that good for musket range?
Just giving you a target number to roll.
Yeah, there's something that feels familiar about it. So I can't tell you if I played it before, but after going through the action deck and those things, and like, it did feel very, like the granddaddy of muskets and tomahawks. And I would just ask the audience, and other people, that if you were like, hey, I know it definitely influenced it or it didn't. And that's not something I've played probably 5 rule sets in this period. I'd say this, Grenadier, Muskets, Tomahawks. What's the Black Powder? Yeah, Black Powder, obviously. But there was one more I'm thinking from that. But yeah, I think Wyndehurst nailed it. Like, it is. It
Do you want
felt
me to pull up the
familiar.
rules, show the rules here, so we can talk kind of through some of like the friction and how the rules run?
Yes, for sure. I think one way to start would be the command qualities,
Yeah,
and
so I got that up.
we're trying to get this to. Okay, he's got. Are you
Yeah,
sharing that?
yeah. Can you see it all right?
No, it's a smaller. screen.
All right. I can make it bigger and post edit, but I can here. There we
Oh,
go.
it's
So,
showing me still mainly, but
yeah. Don't worry about that. Well, it should be good for you guys in post edit.
got it,
Um,
got it.
but at
But
the top of this, this is from the core rules. So the big thing, why did not only did we need the two separate rules because one's for AWI, but the skirmish set of rules aren't in the core rules,
yeah,
and so you kind of need both if you want to do a smaller skirmish skill game like this one. Um, but yeah, so
I would
you'll
say
notice,
a 30,000 foot view, like give them.
yeah. So one of the big things that when we say rules back then are built differently is you'll notice a big thing here. Oh, there's percentages. A lot of the game is it's a D10 set of rules because it's all about percentages. So for this, we did we did both sides as regulars.
Yep.
Kentuckian, can you speak on that because you that was something you gained from the research a little bit and your talk with Paul.
Yeah, so I again big shout out to Paul for this because I felt Paul was pretty well read in the period. He games us a lot, and then obviously he lives right on the Monongahela, so French and Indian War is obviously pretty big for him in this period, 17th, 18th century. The um, the one thing that we talked about with the main rules of habitants and Highlanders is you're looking at like militia and those things. And so if we're getting to 1781 and we're at the end of the American War of Independence, we've got some kind of, I'll say, more than just a ragtag to some degree,
Experience.
experienced group of colonials and Americans. And, with Alexander Hamilton having the light infantry, having those types of troops there, we were like, okay, there seems to be in the base rule set of habitants and Highlanders, there seems to be like a disparate, like regulars and grenadiers are just, the T-1000 walking through the woods
Right.
in the 18th century. And so we were like, okay, let's make it a little bit more fair. So we just kind of kept their stats the same. I will say, when we talked about Paul or Jeff and, the Ashland guys going through their games, there's sometimes of like, when you're thinking about a historical scenario, like how much do you bolt on? How much do you house rule? And so I think it's important to point out here, like step one, when we looked at morale, we looked at those things and we looked at the research, we thought, I think Wyndehurst brings up a great point. It's like, no, they're more than on par.
Yeah. Well, and not to be said, well, we didn't give the rules a chance. I did it against a solo test game where I had the British defenders at the 80%, and I even just bumped the Americans down to 70%, and I think it made a substantial difference.
Yeah, it does.
So we'll get more into that. But so one of the big things they do for friction, we love to talk about how does the game gets its friction. It will feel very similar to those who've played Musket and Tomahawks. And if you look right here, you have your commander quality. In a skirmish game, you're not worried as much about like commander radius, but we made the British commander plotting and the American commander efficient. And where that comes down for your points of tension is you're going to have each player's going to have a deck of cards.
10.
Yep, and you're going to have two for the plotting. You're going to have two 3 action cards, 4 2 action cards, 3 1 action cards, and 1 joker. And your efficient commander is 3 4 2 and 1. And the way that works is you shuffle that up. Each player shuffles up. Whoever's going first flips the first card, and then they get to do that many actions, and they can distribute the actions however they want amongst their units. So they can do all on one unit, they can do 2 on one unit and 1 on another unit. However many actions they have, they can distribute. And then once they finished all their actions and you've done all of the results from that, you go to the other player and you just keep going until essentially you finish the game scenario.
Yeah, there's reshuffling with jokers. There's some variation in there, but when we're saying that, people familiar with muskets and tomahawks will be very familiar with version one. The only added, what I would say is, and if you look plotting and efficient right next to together, the biggest difference is the efficient commander has one more 3 action card, which may not seem like a lot, but I'm telling you, when you're on, a knife's edge on the wall of Redoubt 10, it's a lot. Um, but I think that it was a very good system in the sense that you still felt you had command and control, but you now, when it came down to actions and what you could do, you felt pressed. Do I run these Americans over the redoubt? Do I try to take another movement to get around where maybe the British aren't at, or they're weaker at on one of the redoubt walls? And again, where this attack is happening at night, it's confusing. So this all goes into a little bit of our research about, we're not going to make the British completely startled, right? There's some sappers chopping trees and stuff to get to the redoubt, but we're not going to make them brilliant, and we're not going to make Alexander Hamilton, a buffoon. And we thought this gave us a different variation, and still gave Hamilton, especially with the efficiency, making him efficient, gave him the initiative, which is what you would see in a surprise night attack. So again, just talking a little bit on why we're picking things, why we pick commanders to be certain ways, and I'll kick it back to Wyndehurst to continue
Yeah,
on.
and I think all so myself and my buddy who played it, and I think Kentuckian and the guys he played with, we all fairly liked this card mechanic, even borderline over how Musket and Tomahawks does it, because you're kind of, your hands get all tied there because yes, you have the cards, but it's like only this unit type, whereas this you could apply to any unit. The difference being, Musket and Tomahawks, it's that all units of that type get maybe
Yeah.
one or two actions, where this is, I'm going to spend all these actions, and I really need this unit to get here, so I can just dump those actions into it, and that,
It made me appreciate version 2 Muskets and Tomahawks a little bit more,
yeah,
where you could bank the command points and issue that unit at the time. So it gave you that, kind of like follow me. You're raising your saber and going towards the wall, and I felt like you could tilt your hands as a good commander on the tip you needed to act.
yeah. Now, Kentucky and I already stated that immediately we kind of looked at some things like up here, like morale, and decided, okay, because we're experienced war gamers, we're looking at this rules, and even before our first game, we can start thinking about what changes do we need to make for a fun, playable game. Because yeah, you can always do things just rules as written. And I like I said, I did one game where pretty much everything was rules as written, just so I could prove if it would work or not. And I can tell you it didn't work, with the goal we wanted. So then when you're looking at, this is just like the quick reference chart that's in the rules, since we're only kind of give you a surface overview of everything, but like movement, because we were doing kind of more of a skirmish night attack, we didn't worry too much about formations like line or skirmish. So we just, excuse me, set the movement distance at what we felt was good for the table size at 6 inches. I did try it where if they were in line, it was 3, and skirmish in a 4, and it kind of drug the game out longer than our intention was. And then a terrain effects. We didn't have a whole lot of terrain on the table. We'll put up some pictures in this episode, or just look on our on Patrol podcast Facebook group. You'll see a lot of them, but those we kept pretty much unchanged. Where these rules kind of got tricky is where it comes into like the fire, casualties, melee, morale. We did increase the weapon range to 12 inches, and can anyone want to pick? Paul had a good point on why that made sense. Do you want to add?
Yeah, so I really Paul has I'll say he's got a lot of experience on breaking this rule set down. And if you go back to our Lexington Concord episode, where his Lexington Green, the scenario that's in the book is, like kind of a find the guys, where he wanted to do the action on that 32 foot table. And so we talked about, what could you rightfully see? We're with a 400 to 70 attack, we're thinking like, okay, let's try to break it down into 1/4. So we're looking at 100 maybe Americans to 24, 25, something like that, British. And then we start talking about scale a little bit more, and we're like, the rule set. The one thing I will, the plug for Habitants and Highlanders is, it's designed for 15 millimeter 7 years war games, but it gives you a second rule set in it for skirmish where it says double those things. And if you doubled the muskets right off the bat, you'd only get to like 6 inches because it starts as a base of 3. And so when we're talking about, hey, we're not playing a true one-to-one man scale, but we're getting pretty close. We're 1-4. We need to be a little bit more. And we talk about having a 6-inch movement. Well, it doesn't make any sense to basically you can move in on top of musket fire like, and based on what we heard about in the attack and the 10 that got killed either by cannons, pistols, or British rifles as they're coming through, is like, no, there was some small arms action that was happening there. So we thought, okay, the musket obviously has to outpace the footprint, and what we could hit at that night, 50 yards with moonlight, maybe, who knows. It just seemed right, and Paul kind of walked me through the math on how 12 inches makes sense, especially if you're moving movement to 6 inches, on what a person could probably get in that distance,
Yeah.
when they're 2 to 3 minutes in their action.
Yeah. And speaking of math, the way one thing that, again, it's an older set of rules, so it took us a little bit to work our heads around. But even just like the way they do fire, it's nice and laid out right here. But how you start with how many actions you're spending. So if you're spending 2 actions, it's two times the number of figures times the fire factor, and then any modifiers, and that gives you a number. And that number is a percent. So let's say it ends up being 120% is your final calculation. That 100 is one guaranteed hit, and then you have a 20% chance of a second hit. And then for each hit, you would go down, and here's another thing we adjusted. You have a fire effect chart, and a 1 through 5 is no effect, and then there's this increasing grade of from light wounds to dead. For our games, we thought it would just be simpler and more efficient, just to be like 1 through 5 is no effect, 6 or more is dead or out of action. Because a lot of the way this rules works with the wounds is it's almost like a more nitty gritty skirmish game where you actually have to worry about carrying your wounded and transporting them. And I felt like it slowed the gameplay too much to do it that way. So we simplified the casualty method. But working with percentages was new for me. I've never played a war game that dealt really in percentages. I don't know if you've done many Kentuckian.
I've played it's been a long time, and that was something that was definitely had to talk through. I think one of the important points out here to the listener and viewer is we don't want to like just bog you down in this rule set particularly, but we're to try to bring the scope back out with the episode is. We've seen scenario books for every war game we've played, right? We've seen either an author take time to get it to there, but where me and Wyndehurst kind of see this friction as happening is now, okay, we see what the rules basically say, and if they give us the skeleton, if you want to say, of how we want to get the historical fight to the table with a feel, and then the next F word is fun. Like, how can you make it engaging? How can you make it um, feel right, but still be fun and decisive? And I think it's an important point here to talk about. We've already said a few edits, and we may have put some people to sleep. But the idea that I want to say is like, I think that Jeff went through, and Jeff and the crew down there in Ashland, as well as like Paul, is okay. How do you make this a game that's playable, that's engaging? And are we just fighting a historical simulation, or are we fighting a war game? Let me be very clear. I think me and Wyndehurst kind of made the attempt that we were going to fight a war game. We were going to, make it as dynamic as we could for both sides. We keep going back to the reference that we talk about where I love playing the Alamo as much as anybody else, but I think in my, almost 40 years, and most of that in the hobby, like I've seen the Texans win once at the Alamo. So, how do you make that? And I think the viewer, the listener, if you're thinking about bringing a historical tabletop, this is probably, one of the most important aspects. And me and Wyndehurst, it's great to, I think, engage in the project with somebody else, because when we talk about things, or I have a good idea, and, I talk to Paul, I talk to Wyndehurst, and I'm like, hey, what about, making the muskets where you give Hamilton the chance to either load the muskets or to keep them unloaded? And, maybe that goes up to the percentage of an ND, and how can that impact people? And so that's where I think then it's testing, and how well can you do that in your mind, versus we see that all the time throughout military history. Me and Wyndehurst have a great plan, just like a general had a great plan, and then when you try to execute it, you haven't thought of every variable. So, for example, one of the first games I played, and I talked through Paul with this rule, is basically a third of the force from turn one was going to come on another flank, and the Americans kind of had to make a roll for that, and then there would be a roll for, if you loaded your weapons to maybe engage in musketry before you come over the Redoubt 10 wall, there was a higher chance of you being exposed. And what would that mean? Is the range of the British weapons now going to go farther? Like, do we edit that in the rule to basically, hey, they know they're out there? Like some dumb private fighting Kentuckian dropped his musket, his Kentucky long rifle, and it popped, and so now we're in a world of pain. Versus maybe you get more movement, or maybe you're more effective when you get to the wall if you're able to shoot and then come over the wall with a bayonet. So there were a lot of, I'll say, points into how we broke that down. I think to Wyndehurst's points, we tried to play as true to the original rules because we thought it was important to, let's not bolt stuff on too early. I think I bolted on the outflanking rule and the loading rule one time, and I saw it not come to effectiveness because the American player, there was no really risk on whether they came on loaded or unloaded. Not what we were trying to effectuate with the rules. So I want to pause right there to say that, to say I think this is important. When you're bringing the battle to life, to think about those things, and that's why you see people will gripe about scenario writers, and I think if you try to create your own scenario, you're going to have a lot more respect for people that are rules authors or scenario book writers, because these are things we hope they're wrestling with as they're, hey, is this going to be a simulation? Is this a fun war game to give you a feel, or and what are we trying to achieve? So I just want to air that out right now, that we were going more for war game ish, and there were decision points like already coming at us. We already talked about the morale of the troops. We've talked about the ranges now. We've talked about movement, and now we're talking about scenario specific based on the attack. What were your thoughts, Wyndehurst, on kind of, again, not bolting anything on initially and playing the rules as we did?
Yeah, so it is the the historical point that they didn't load the weapons was something we talked a lot about in how and if we should simulate it in the game. So there is that fine line between history and like in Paul's game, like if he focused on just the kind of initial fight, the British are retreating, it's over very quick. That doesn't make for a fun game. So
Yeah,
he
on a
basically
six
had
by four. Yeah, yeah.
right. He had to eventually end on a solution with a 30+ foot table. And so, as experienced wargamers, you can go in, and that's the only reason I brought over the details of those rules, is to show like what we had to start changing right off the bat to kind of and capture the feel of the game. Because while we were playing this mostly just for us and like one on one with some other people, we're like, okay, if this is a game we wanted to introduce a new person to, or run at a convention or something, it's got to be more fun than just like the two of us playing it, because we can have a lot of fun playing it strictly historical, but is that going to be fun for everybody? So trying to find that balance. And so, adjusting like ranges and stuff, like I played it through rules as written, and I did allow the Americans to fire pretty much whenever they wanted, but they rules as written with the kind of reduced morale, they were at such a disadvantage you couldn't achieve the historical outcome,
Hmm.
because the rules didn't allow you really to achieve that historical outcome if you just played the rules as written. So you have to start crafting the scenario, and that's where we
And you're
start.
mainly, when you say rules as written, you're mainly talking about, just to make sure the viewer and listener is going, is like the morale that was given to them in the French and Indian War, right? We didn't upgrade them to regulars and those
Right, the
things.
regular morale, the kind of initial weapon ranges and movement speeds, and formation restrictions. Um, like I played through it with pretty much all that being as written, and it almost it theoretically, right, the defender should have an advantage against an attacker, and it was a lot harder of a fight than it was historically. So then I think that's why we started. When you start talking about, okay, what do we need to bolt on for that scenario? There was a lot of things, because I kept bringing up the Kentuckian that, that is a big point, but how do we simulate that?
Yeah, I
And
want, but I guess because it's hard to keep these two events and how we kind of wrote our outline. What I'll do real quick is I want to just talk rules as written because I think you played that mainly the
yeah,
most, and like I think you could be enough to say there that that's kind of where we were at. We had this a little bit out of order, so I'll say it right now, and we'll move back to Wyndehurst to talk about things that he edited in the scenario. And we didn't mention it earlier when we talked about the project. Obviously, the scale we chose 28
okay,
millimeter. The biggest reason we did that was our AWI collection was moderate in that level. You've seen us painting epics, but it was moderate in 28 millimeter. And so we were looking at actions. We're seeing things that we can do, and we all had this on about a 60-day timeline. I think me and Wyndehurst built our Redoubt 10s in a few hours, over maybe a day or 2 days. So it was great to be there to have the pictures. I already know people right now are going to flame me. The pikes, the logs that are sticking out of Redoubt are all kind of together and everything. Again, I just want to say, in building the Redoubt, I made it as true as I could to the Army History Museum that had pictures and stuff of it there, as well as some of the paintings. But I knew, and I think this goes into anybody who's building terrain for a scenario, playability was not going to be there if I didn't have some space and I could get, like, I thought about the gaps I had in between the Redoubt kind of logs, and I was like, okay, I could fit a figure in between these two spots, and it would still give enough to like move a line of infantry through. So I think that's even important. We haven't talked terrain
yeah,
too much with our other people because they had mats, green mats, some foliage, trees, get the topography in the hills. We had to create a piece for this, and we put ourselves on some strict timelines. So to do all of that in 60 days, that's kind of where we're at. And then
right,
we're diving into the rules. We're I think Wyndehurst probably played it the truest he could to rules as written. And he was very vehement with me, and I was like, I don't know if that's going to work, but I think he wanted to stay true to, like, could you play this game, if it's supposed to replicate this period to some degree. And again, Habitants and Highlanders is French and Indian War, with AWI being whites of their eyes, without doing a lot. Could you play this game at this? And I think Wyndehurst nailed it when he said, it became basically an attack on a fort, and we weren't able to, rules as written, show the surprise of
yeah,
Hamilton and the assault. But I'll kick it back to him as the next kind of two things that we're going to lump together here, and I think we're going to spend a lot of our meat on, is the games themselves and the kind of after action reviews of them.
yeah. So yeah, when Kentuckian talks, also I want to kind of piggyback off scale. Um, if we had given ourselves more time, then we probably would have built bespoke forces true to what was there, probably using epic scale AWI. Um, but you don't always have that luxury. Sometimes a great idea hits you, and you've got, like we did, you got 60 days. And I don't have any AWI stuff. I've got French and Indian War that can easily be
In a pinch.
repurposed in a
Yeah, yeah.
pinch. And I think they did the trick. So that was a major factor in scale, and that also might affect your rules, because if you don't have a lot of time to paint a new force, your rules might be limited to what scale models you have. But going into kind of talking about the the event, so when we asked the other guys,
I guess it's just important to note there, to your point, because I
yeah,
think you nailed it, and I think you gave this to me when I had this wild hair idea. Was, I think you had said it to me early on when I was either at Yorktown or something. I was like, well, this will be a good way to show, that if we do this, you can do it in a pinch. Now, I
yeah,
highly advise that, you spend a lot of time in a period or a scenario or a battle that you want to replicate. I don't know what that looks like for most people. I think a safety net for me would be like 6 months to a year. With my move coming up, the 250th right around the corner, we were like, let's challenge ourselves, which
yeah,
is always not, sometimes not a great idea. Let's challenge ourselves to see if we can do this, a skirmish assault, and build the terrain in 60 days. And
and get a playable game at the end of it.
yeah, and I think you were very. Um, I was very optimistic, and I think you were a realist, and I think I became a realist as you were,
Yeah,
telling me, like, Okay,
Well,
this is gonna be hard.
as Mythbusters always says, failure is always an option.
Yeah.
But like just kind of rehome, like the whole purpose of this episode isn't to say how can you go out and redo this battle, but our lessons, we're just adding on to our lessons learned, success or failure of trying to do this. And so one of the big points from what Kentuckian is saying is, had we had more time, we probably could have done a better job. But I feel like in 60 days, we got a playable game. I would take the game with pretty much how we came up with it, maybe with only a few more tweaks and practices, to a convention and run new people for. So I think we got to something that is playable and
Yep.
is fun,
Yep.
maybe not perfectly honed and refined, but a good version one
Yep.
within 60 days. And so it's doable. So with that, we didn't have a specific event like, is this specifically a game for a convention, or is it something I would just play with a buddy? So I think we tried to leave it open to, would it be something we could do at a convention? And that's where I say like version one. A version two we could refine better if it was going to be like multiple players versus a one-on-one. But as we talk, I'm kind of combine this this one and one of the previous topics. So talk more about the scenario and the adjustments we made for the scenario with our after action reports, things that worked well, things that didn't, and our experience. Because I think they kind of, those are where we got our lessons learned of how we
Yep.
needed to refine the scenario. Right. So I started with my first game. I played the rules pretty much true to the way the rules were kind of written. Didn't get the end result we wanted, which was especially frustrating after Kentuckian had played several modified games. And he's like, oh, yeah, every game's like historical. And I was like, why am I getting that? And we talked, and that's the thing, is we talked about it, talked about what worked for me and what didn't and what worked for him. And kind of was like, okay, well, I was doing it this way, rules, pretty much straight out of the book, and it wasn't getting that feel. The second big game I did, again, and we allowed for the first couple games, pretty much all the games, we allowed the American player to have the option to shoot at some point. And when we were discussing it, Kentuckian had a really good point where he's like, if we don't, then if you just deny them the opportunity to shoot at all, then it basically turns into Workstriff Zulu attack with guys basically armed with sharp sticks charging a defensive position, guys armed with guns. And that didn't sound like a very fun game for this period for us.
And historically, we got I got feedback from a person when I was posting the battle reports, and we were allowing that. I got feedback from a person who was like, "I do the tours, they didn't fire a shot," and I was like, I've heard that as well. I've heard there were pistols there, and that there was, you're talking about a battle that takes place in 10 minutes, where a dozen, 10 people die, and 20 plus maybe wounded out of the Americans. So it is violence action, very quick, very surprise attack. If how do you get to where, is that just a dice roll? Do you just, let's put all our models out and like if you roll over a 3, you get me, you take the 4, and are we playing it that way, or how are we playing it? So we already said, I think that's, I wanted to push against a little bit of the the simulation ideas. We wanted to have some variation where that person is Hamilton and they've gotten the order and they can do what they want. It's how do you achieve that? And maybe they're a student in history and they're like, we're just going to rush, like we're not going to shoot at all. Or maybe they're maybe they shoot a few times and duck away. Who knows? Like, that was going to give them options, though. I think that'll give
Yeah.
us a good talking point.
And I think that is, I 100% agree, with Kentuckian, that an important aspect, I think, of wargaming is, especially when you're doing an actual battle, is to give the player the opportunity to do what the historical commander did or not to. And so I did, the last 2 games I did for it. In the first one, the guy I was playing with, he, knowing he had the option to shoot, didn't stick with history and got bogged down trying to suppress the British in the fort. And he took significantly more casualties by doing that. He did eventually overwhelm the fort because he just had superior numbers, but at a much higher price. And that kind of, to me, if anything, that kind of shows historically why what they did was so effective, that violent of action charging in. But if you don't give the players that opportunity, then it's not a game. They're not having the opportunity to test that. Um, and then in the next game we played with another mechanic where we did blind markers, like hidden markers, movement markers, and it kind of forces the American player to get closer before they have the opportunity to shoot. And it really encouraged that kind of violent of action and maneuver and rushing in. And that made a much faster game, but a much more realistic game and a much more, to me, a fun game. Um, but still, they had the option, and if they chose to use it or not, that was up to them. Just like historically, he could have let them shoot, and maybe the fact that we say nah, no one fired a shot is part of the legend. Like, especially for anyone who really studies World War II, the the amount of misinformation that comes back, especially. I read a book about World War II naval combat, and the number of times pilots would report sinking ships. We sank the Japanese fleet 3 times over, and they sunk our fleet 3 times over with the number of kills they pilots claimed. So, and we're talking about further back in time. So the accuracy of that, and considering who the commander was and what a prominent role he played in American history, you've got to accept that some things could be up to legend, and there's got to be a little bit more room where you can say, okay, well, the story is, they went in with guns unloaded and then probably didn't fire a shot. But so we just limited with the hidden movement markers. Okay, we're going to restrict how soon you can shoot, but you always have that choice. That's up to you. If you want to rush in and see how that goes. If you want to try and suppress a fire. So I think that was some of the things we had to adjust as we went through in the scenario to kind of capture the feel. How did your games go, Kentuckian, and how that affected the decisions you were thinking about for rules?
I think I was able to play with two people that were veteran war gamers on different occasions, and so I think I played through the game a total of like 5 times. And I won't count some of the solos, but as I was talking to people that were more experienced with the rules and what we wanted to replicate, I played through a couple of solo actions and solo turns to kind of make sure like this made sense when we got to movement and range and climbing over the wall or the defenses of the wall, shooting, and what felt right. And it's always funny how you can, in your mind something works in the rules mechanics in an isolation, and you're like that'll work. Here it's just worked. I played it out on the table, but then when the sum of its parts, when you put it in the game, it kind of can break down. A little kind of analysis. I know we've talked a lot about this scenario in the night attack, but again, to just refresh, I don't know how much we talked about because we changed. We tried to change to say like, is this giving us a good result? And we didn't just try to change every time to get whiplash. We tried to say like, this seems reasonable. This seems historical. Let's go with this and give some options. So basically, 3 waves of Americans that would be on turn 1, turn 3, and turn 5. And in those waves, they would have 3 units of 12 to get to 36, and so we'd be a little bit over the 100 mark at the end. But we would be
Real quick,
close. Go
I,
ahead.
I want to add a note to that. And the reason we decided the waves instead of having everybody come on the beginning is because, based off Kentuckian's research, it kind of appeared that if they're moving up, not necessarily in column, but units at the front, toward the middle, and to the back, then it would be reasonable in a game to say, okay, the first guys come in, and then a couple turns later, the next group of guys kind of get into and so
Yeah,
we didn't just do it arbitrarily. It seemed like we could justify it
yeah.
historically for a rule mechanic. So
The
continue.
video of the assault, shows them kind of assaulting in that little bit of an attack column to get up there and then circling the fort. So we thought that delay would give us enough time. And you're talking about basically 20 cards, would be played in the first turn, and then you'd have another 20 cards before the Americans got, their second wave of reinforcements. And we talked about rolling for the reinforcements and those things, or maybe rolling for one of them to see if the attack, got staggered at all or anything
Or the
like that.
flanking attack.
The flanking attack would get staggered. And I'll be honest, I think all of our half dozen games in playing this scenario, I know me and Wyndehurst have talked about it. We never got to the third iteration of uh, Americans. Is that the Redoubt was taken? Well, besides the one that the British won that I think he played, but
Yeah. Well, we had one where we got long enough in the game where they could have come on, but that was the one where the Americans were taking such heavy casualties because they tried to stand outside and shoot,
I,
and
I,
just
I don't want
delay
to.
tactic.
Yeah, I don't want to count them as coming on in my game, even though the first game I played as a local here, Bob Dean, and we played, and he moved them onto the board, and then it was so pivotal. We were fighting on the walls of the Redoubt
Right.
that he
You never
never
spent
moved it.
actions on them.
He
Yeah.
never moved them again. So it worked to us in the sense of it gave that commander some dynamic choices to bring up reinforcements. There's a lot of times where wave two, and it gave you that attack of gave you that feel of a night attack, maybe having some issues with coordination and, allowing the commander, Hamilton, whoever played the American, to kind of focus on coordination and how well you could do that at night. So it gave us enough friction where we felt that was pretty accurate. I think me and Wyndehurst played that similar, or at least first 2 to 3 games. From there, we thought, well, if it just becomes a turkey shoot, and we allowed the American player to shoot, and gave them a smorgasbord of options, is that kind of breaking the rules, or is that getting so much away from the historical scenario? And I think Wyndehurst has made a great point with when we added the decoys, and we basically, for every unit the Americans had, one marker would be real, would be the American unit, and one marker would be fake. And so the British player would see 6 markers coming towards them on turn one, knowing that 3 of them are real and 3 of them are fake. And that's, they're hearing squirrels and the abatis out there crunching. They're hearing something like that. But to me, where it's hard to play some of the surprise attacks very accurately. And it was, a mechanic that I've seen in Muskets and Tomahawks and a lot of the Pony Wars games I've played with Indians, Native Americans, and Buffalo Soldiers is, if you have movement of different things out there, you're keeping the person on their heels. And so you can kind of replicate surprise. So we just thought that that was a good enough mechanic that it replicate the surprise as the British player with 4 6-man squads and a gun that can't see really that far beyond the Redoubt at night, or kind of thinking like, okay, I hear stuff cracking over there in the woods. Is that an American, regiment, or is that a squirrel or a dog? What is that? And I really liked the tension that that gave. And the only thing that we added to that is, and again, we're talking about bolting on to recreate the rules, is the British player would get a spotting roll that they would use their action for, and or they just get for a unit when they had their action, and that spotting roll could go up to 18 inches. And there was some, as you're talking about scenarios and how stuff breaks down, we thought movement plus rifle range gave that enough of a buffer that if we're saying, the 6 inch, 50 meters, whatever you want to say, musket range at night, we're like, well, the British player could probably see form beyond that. Maybe they could hear things probably somewhere in the distance in that area, especially if there's hundreds of Americans sneaking up on your fort. So we thought that that created enough tension. Then we added anybody who's hidden in a pile of leaves, or who has done some lurking, or like tried to sneak through some trees, knows that the more that you do that, the more noise that you're making. Like noise and light discipline is kind of eroding away the more you move. And so we started with like a 10% chance, it would go to 20 as soon as the American moved onto the table making noise. And so on a 9 or a 10, if the British player tried to spot, it would be a 20% chance to hit. And then for every action that American unit moved, it would just add 10% chance. So then it goes to 80, 8, 9, 10 to 7, once they're at fourth action. And the closer they get to the fourth, the easier they are going to be exposed. And so when we played it that way, it just, I think to Wyndehurst's point, it went really fun. It made it go faster because it expedited a lot of the sneaking up to the fort. So it gave us that historical feel of this night attack surprise. And then it felt like it replicated the tension that we needed while keeping both players engaged. So I really enjoyed, how we kind of bolted that on from rule sets that we had. And I felt like it basically, I think, was a good connection point for the whole scenario.
Yeah, I really think that's what brought in the fact that it was a night fight and justified the not kind of loaded weapon simulate, like how you would simulate that. Because when we ran it, we wouldn't let the American player fire. They didn't even have the option of, if, while they were hidden, they weren't allowed to shoot. So basically, they had to get spotted or close within range where they're automatically spotted. And with the idea being like the intention was guns unloaded to close as you could. And that really encouraged the player to use that violative action to kind of rush in close. And by the time they got spotted, they're, at musket range. So if the cards play right, the British might get a shot or two off. And if the American player wants, they can rush in and go straight into the assault. And it also almost forced the British player, who doesn't have a whole lot of to maneuver anyway, but you only have 4 units. So you basically are prevented from stacking them all on one side or the other if you haven't spotted the units. So by the time the Americans can close in, like they have the option of closing in, the British could be spread out throughout the fort. And now it's like if they get over the wall, they're fighting inside the fort now, which is what happened in some of our games. And that felt a lot more historical, even though the Americans did take a couple times to shoot, but the rules kind of allow that. There's when you meet it, it kind of goes, you move. Once you're move within 1 inch of an enemy, you have to stop. But you could spend another action to shoot right there, or you might have the option for closing fire or something. And so it would be almost hamstringing the rules, I think, too much not to allow that. And so I was fine with that being the only shooting pretty much, because that's really what it came down to. There really wasn't this big exchange of gunfire because
Yeah.
they were encouraged to move in quickly. And I don't know how for your games, Kentuckian, when you did the hidden movement, did you bring on the second wave? Did it play much in effect?
We did bring on the second wave and we allowed them to be decoyed. I gave it up to the player as their option because at that point, I think we always found that it was very historically accurate in the amount of casualties that the Americans were getting before they were up to the wall. So you've got anywhere between 5 to 7 guys are probably down, and once you get over the wall, the hand-to-hand combat's going to be bloody. Even if the Americans lose a few more, we've got the historical result. Once one British unit goes down, that's probably Broken Arrow, the Redoubt's fallen. And so we thought that was, I left it up to the player. I think one time they played where they're like, I don't need the markers anymore. I'm kind of going to that's the weak spot. Like I'm going to try to dogpile. And then I think in another game they played where they still use the markers. And the only reason they did that was I had another British squad on the opposite side of the fort, which I thought was a great kind of tactical move and allowed the player to keep the markers on there. So that way they were like, I don't know if I can pull them away. Like there might be some Americans. So like there seems to be an even battle with the British and the Continentals or the Americans on the wall. And if I pull that British unit over there, maybe I can throw the Americans back off the wall. But if I leave them in place, if I pull them over there and they throw them off the wall, there might be another American unit that comes unchallenged over this, back corner of the wall. And every game, it was funny how both the opponents didn't that I played never talked about the games between themselves. But I will say that they used almost the exact same strategy on opposite sides of the wall. It basically became one American unit was a feint, and two would coordinate with the third. If it's one's the feint, the other's going for the opposite corner, and the third is going for the back corner to try to get where you're at. And so the British player has to spread out to some degree, has to be able to challenge the Continentals and Americans as they're coming up towards the wall. And then now, if the British player is maybe rolling well or getting the Americans pushed a little bit, guess what? You've got more Americans pulling away, and now you're like, can I even make it to these rounds? Do I have to shift people now? So I think the tension from both players' perspective, and I got kind of talked with my opponents on what they thought, and I sent them the articles that I'd had, at least very brief synopsis articles about the overall attack, and if they had any thoughts on it. And I think both thought like, okay, that's challenging, that's fun, and that's interesting. So I do think it did matter. I'll say even in the later
Yeah.
stage of the game.
Yeah, and there's plenty of things I think if we continue to develop this that we might add little things here or there or refine. Like I would probably make. I'd like to test some things with the hidden movement markers. I think that might um, be interesting because you also when you're bouncing with waves coming on, if it's not a very fun game if the attacking player is just like, well, I'm just going to sit here and wait till I've got all my force on, and then I'll just go in with everything. If that's what players do, then you might as well just give them everything at the beginning. But we didn't find that in any of our games that they would just sit around and wait. So, like you said, like that third wave almost, well, I don't think that third wave ever mattered. Whether it came on or not, or they had the option to bring it on, it never played a part. So then there's begs the question: well, is it worth keeping the third wave? Like, how would you just? So those are like things that we could continue to improve upon. Like, it doesn't break the game as it stands, but I think it's there are always going to be little things you might want to change and refine as you play through it, and as you see how players might try and break it. Because you said you had one game where someone was like they just dumped a whole bunch of actions on one unit to rush around behind all of
Yep.
a sudden.
Yep. So again, one of their three action cards, they basically started on the front corner, and you're moving 18 inches, so they're dead sprint. It ended up, we said it was Hamilton himself, as went to an unguarded edge, and so just a crucial card to be played at that like pivotal moment, and that commander directing them like, hey, here's the weakest point of the wall, let's go. So that all worked out pretty well, I thought, and it gave them it gave you that tension. My concern would be is, and I think it's good to mention now, is talking to Jeff and them in Ashland is are like, what are the victory conditions? And if remember a callback to that episode, the viewer and listener, they knew that the Indian ambush wasn't going to be successful at Point Pleasant. They kind of like there wasn't a way that was going to overrun eventually the provincials and the redcoats that were coming down the road. But they were going to show how it was bloody, right? And especially in the initial stages. And it's the same with Lexington and Concord. Like we know historically how that ends, and you play on a 32 foot table. So if that's the case, if you're playing the Alamo again, the Texan knows they're going to die in the fort. So then what is their victory condition? And so we made it to, we had talked. I did not develop them prior to the scenario, but I'd talked with my opponents, and I think it was like, if you could make it through wave two, you're winning. You've made the Americans pay so much for this Redoubt that it's definitely going to be a sting. At least winning the scenario right now. Are they going
Right.
to send in a second wave, or a fourth or fifth wave coming? But at least maybe they'd have to call out the attack that night. There's a bunch of reports where Washington is in the distance, and there's some there. I read one report where there was like a bullet landed close or something where he was watching the attack. I so I thought that was interesting, and sometimes you have to sacrifice that in the historical scenarios, but then that gives the player, right, the British player is like, okay, there's something to shoot for. Like this isn't just, and I think that's important with scenarios. Sometimes when people play the historical simulations, there can be no fun. And now when you hamper the player enough to say you don't have any options, I'm going to make you the weakest commander. I'm not going to give you the points. So it's like you can't even really survive. Tension is good, and I love the historical battlefields and reading about them. When I'm trying to replicate on the tabletop, I will put my finger on the scale to make sure, like, is there something where this player, this commander, can show himself or herself can prove themselves, and I think that's important. I wouldn't just think of that as like an afterthought.
Right, and Kentuckian has a good point, but I think that goes again towards what is the target event. So if let's say we were writing this for Wargame Soldier and Strategy, right, we would probably set in it victory conditions for the British based on how long they can hold out. And it's not that they're going to hold out, but how long they hold out. And then victory condition, like victory points. But that's saying like this is a game for two people to play. But when we were talking about this as we were developing it, Kentuckian made the point, it's like, no, this is because I was talking about like if this was a convention game, it's like you'd always have to play as the British. At a convention game, if you're running this somewhere, the host or like the GM is probably best suited to play the British because the Americans are going to have more to do. They're going to have more fun. And then it doesn't matter. Like it doesn't, you're not trying to tip the scale so that the British player has more to do or a chance to win because your slow death is for the enjoyment of the person you're playing or the people who are playing with you. So that's something to keep in mind as well when you're trying to develop a scenario. Is it what is the target audience and environment? Am I going to run one of the sides as a GM, or am I running the game and players are playing both sides? Because then you really might want to make adjustments. If like for this one, if you're even if we were running this at an event where players were playing both sides, we'd probably have a list of special rules or one-off scenarios we could do, that we'd want to come up with to interject depending how the game goes to keep it fun and engaging. I think Paul talked about that and the other guys talked about that, being able to, as GMs, see how it's going. And if you need to add an extra unit, if you need to let the leader do something special or have the commander die at a certain point and the players don't know it's going to happen, regardless what how the battle's going, you can do that. But it really helps to kind of know what is the target at the end of this journey of building this scenario. And we didn't really go into it so much with that in mind. I think we kind of let the process dictate for us. And that's where we kind of came down with, okay, here's how we would balance it if it was one way, but if we are doing this, then it's fine like it is. And that just kind of comes from experience and to having talked to people through and listened and watched other games through this podcast and other people's content and seeing those opportunities. You can learn a lot from them, and which is one of the reasons we're doing this, right? To share our experience.
I hope, our goal, as we think we're wrapping up talking about the scenario, and bookending the 250th is like, we put ourselves in a little bit of a box, hamstringing ourselves, because when we initially talked and we had this idea for the episode, if you've looked at especially my painting stuff here and Wyndehurst's foray into epic AWI, is like we were like, let's do Bunker Hill, like let's do the end of it, and we think we can get it painted in a few months. And life gets in the way. Wyndehurst had some stuff with his work. I had stuff that I had to ratchet down on with my work. And so I was like, okay, I just can't spit these epics out as fast as I can. And that led us to Yorktown. And I think that's just one key point here with Redoubt 10 is we thought, okay, smaller amount of miniatures. What can we do? I've never built a Redoubt, in this period. Wyndehurst has neither. And we were like, I think we can pull this off in 60 days. And our goal was to show is that, putting, I guess, our backs against the wall is, can you replicate these battles? Can you bring history to life on the tabletop? And we talk a lot of rules reviews. We talk interviews. We do those things with people. But our ultimate goal here was to say, you can do this in 60 days with not a lot of time. The miniatures you have at your disposal. And if you wanted to try to kind of like do a foray into this, I love scenario books as much as the next person. I will buy them in the periods I game, even if I don't have those rule sets. I honestly love trying to climb into that author's mind about how they, went through the reports, if they exist, and how they try to reflect that on the tabletop. And, sometimes that's great when people say, this commander is an imbecile and so he's in negative 50, or this commander is a genius. But sometimes it's awesome to see how they create tension in other ways. And we wanted to do this as an experiment, us not being I'd been to Yorktown before and Redoubt 10 before, but I was like, just feeling on the size of the people, the tension and the stress, and knowing the outline of kind of how the quick 10-minute battle happened, I was like, this would be a cool way, and I think we can pull this off. And I will say, we've got some bumps and bruises with, us saying we're going to do this with a rule set we've never played. We're going to do this with a period we don't have a lot of figures in that scale for this period, and we're going to build a terrain piece set for this exact
that we've
fight
never made before.
that we've never made before. And I think it turned out pretty good, I'll say, for 60 days. And
Yeah, it was fun.
so hopefully this like pushes the listener or viewer. We want to do these interviews. We really are enjoying this. The talk with Jeff, the talk with Paul when somebody, I think that's historical wargaming. And as you see, like our mission statements, we want to collaborate with the community. We want to go in and say like, hey, what have you done that, maybe isn't Waterloo, where you found an action near your house, you had a family member involved in, it could be a continent or two away, and you were like, I haven't seen this war gamed, or I want to try this out, or I'm going to try to mess with this scenario. And I really enjoyed that part of historical wargaming. It is great to play the lineup ancients, and we're going to play the exact same scenario we've always played with just different skinned armies, like Romans, Germans, Israelites, Philistines. Those are I enjoy those games, but I always find it fun to say I'm not going to play the same objective game I've played, or secure the bridgehead or something like that. I want to play. Let's put ourselves in the position of Hamilton, or I believe it's Major Campbell is the British commander at the 70 men at the Redoubt 10. Let's put ourselves in those positions and let's see if we can, based on the reports and based on what we have, get close. Okay, they didn't fire weapons. How are we going to do that with the rules? Well, let's side on the error of giving the commander the ability to do a little bit more, And so you saw first few times, okay, they're firing guns as soon as they get on the board, muskets as soon as they get on the board. Now let's try to hone the commander in a little bit, but still give them freedom of movement with the decoys. I just really look forward to the community sharing any scenarios they've written for different periods and talking about battle reports. And, there's a lot of stuff, obviously, in Europe and North America, Africa, Asia, obviously, and around the world, that there are some of these lesser known, and I don't think Redoubt 10 is lesser known, but these engagements that maybe aren't fully captured in the scenario book. So I'd love to see people kind of say like, I'm going to dive into the history, because this is a historical wargaming podcast, and we really love that aspect of it, and the research, the gaming, and the history of it is just fantastic. And so this aligned like all three of those passions into this project, and we love it when we see wargamers do that. And so we tried to replicate it, and we tried to say like, let's go hard mode, 60 days. Can we make it happen? And I would say we've got some bumps. We've got some AAR comments, but I think it was a good effort, and we did get a solid result. So no, I really look forward to the feedback and everything else from the viewer and listener on that. Wyndehurst, your thoughts on?
Yeah, I think the big takeaway for what we went through and learned that I want to make sure you all understand, and especially what we learned by hamstringing ourselves and putting ourselves in the box the way we did, is if you listened to our episode and looked at the photos and everything for the Point Pleasant game, you might be intimidated because like, wow, that's a lot of figures and a lot of beautiful terrain.
And Jeff and Newman, they're amazing painters. So
Right, and it's like I can't put a game on like that. And then you see the Lexington Concord game, and you're like, I don't have space or stuff to cover a 32-foot table. And it can be really intimidating, especially when you go to cons and you see these big, beautiful historical battles put on, that you're like, I want to do that, but I'll never get there. That's so much stuff, or it's going to take me forever. No, it doesn't. It took us 60 days to put a game together. Like, we just showed you could do it and have fun doing it and have a product at the end that you're happy with, and that was fun game to play. Like, it is doable. Do not be intimidated. If you have a specific battle, historical, or you really want to run a game based on a battle, you can do it. It might take a little bit of work up front, and you might have to curb your expectations or your goals and not just go for Hastings right off the bat, or D-Day right off the bat. But it's like, well, I really want to do something in that adjacent. There's lots of stuff. You just have to put the time in to find the battle or the peripheral area, like we're doing. Like we said at the beginning, this battle was often seen as a part of a bigger game that might be the whole Battle of Yorktown. But okay, we can't do that in 60 days, so let's focus in on one spot. And we did it, and it was a great experience. And I think the end result is something that I'm proud of, to have run a friend through the game, and I would take somewhere with a little refinement and play. So yeah, that's what I want you all to learn from this episode. Why we did this, why we did this episode.
Yeah, and 60 days is being gracious. I think there were several weeks where it's like maybe of those 60 days, 2 months, we have like 1 to 2 hours like that week is either going towards research or something else. We had a lot of life. I mean, overall, I think maybe even with the creation of the Redoubt and everything, I'd say, 2 days, full 2 days tops is like, several hours here and there, a handful of times. So 2 to 3 days tops, like full hours
Yeah.
on would be
And to caveat my comment, like I didn't, my collection is French Indian War, right? And they're not all painted because I haven't finished those armies. But for the purpose of like testing and being like, okay, here's a scenario that is good. Um, and I know if I was going to take this to Historicon and meet up with Kentuckian there, like between the two of us, we could have enough finished models to run this. Um, so that was factored into the mental process. All right, do I have to finish painting these models in order to do this? No, I don't, because of the way we're going about it and what the end goal is. Um,
honestly
but
recommend it that way for people who are maybe they're there's some seasoned historical war gamers that are going to have stuff like you that can proxy in their collection. But um, if you're creating a scenario, I wouldn't paint and then have the finished project to play it because
you don't know
uh,
what you need.
yeah, and well, you don't know if you're going to have to lean on the scales a little bit if you're developing it. So I think I've never found something that works perfectly in my mind when I've developed either scenarios for funsies or based off any like historical engagement. It's gone exactly seamless to the tabletop. And I don't know many authors that would probably tell you that as well that have written the books. There's a drafting playtesting process. So
Yeah.
I recommend you do it, like Wyndehurst did it, where you're like, okay, I might put some pewter models out here to flesh this out, but we're experimenting. Like that's the whole
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah. Those are all my thoughts. You have any wrap up thoughts before we move on to our final two sections?
No, it was a great. We've got a theme obviously for this year with 250th birthday. We've never seemed to get anything right. I know that some AWI historical nerds are going to grill us on that. We're playing Lexington. We're talking about Lexington Concord, 251 years away. Now we're at 1781, so we're nowhere near there. But we wanted to really stay on the Revolution. We thought it was. I'll be honest. I've wargamed it several times. I've got the rules. I've got handfuls of models in different scales. But because of the lack, I'd say, of larger armies in that scale, and some of the models, some of the engagements. I've played Guilford Courthouse more than anybody knows. Again, where that happens in the South, and you got Kings Mountain and stuff. You've got some really cool engagements that people from Appalachia, my neck of the woods, really enjoy. But I've never gone into it a lot from there. You don't until you get to Yorktown. Oh, and you talk about Saratoga and some other things, Calpins. Like you've got some not great actions you probably don't want to play from the American side, where the British might love to play those actions. So I look forward to gaming more of this period throughout the year, and just kind of harkening back to, obviously, us and the British love each other now, right? We're total friends always. But yeah, it's fun to play through this period and wrap your arms around the history again. And I enjoyed this project, and I hope I really, the biggest thing I like about this is I would just ask you, if you're a listener or viewer, engage with us. Please post on the On Patrol group, shoot us messages or whatever. And I'm curious, like, if you have recently, if you have in the past, shoot us your scenarios and things. And, we might actually like to play with it, or, play through your scenario, or talk to you about it, maybe on this podcast, if you're willing. Because we just really like, a lot of people that have set their minds to something like this put in a lot of time and effort, way more than what 60 days is. We want to show that people that are interested can do it in that time, but it's always awesome. Jeff and Paul, it was awesome to see their research kind of pay off. But that's all I have. Look forward to hearing from you guys about that, and I'll kick it to Wyndehurst for our next section.
Yep. So as always, we like to finish each episode with kickbag and scouting report. So for kickbag, if you follow Kentuckian, which you better, and if you don't, please go follow him. And or if you're on our On Patrol Facebook group, which if you aren't, you should be. It's a great place to engage with us and the community. But you would have seen his photos as he's packed his house for his next PCS in so many years, the joys of military service. And you will see the stacks and stacks and stacks of black with yellow lid totes.
Yeah,
Um,
I
which we reviewed as a kit bag earlier this year, no, late last year, the shelves, those plastic shelves, and I feel like I remember seeing that those shelves were almost designed for these
They
types of
are,
totes.
yeah, they are. The it's again, I think our life might be different than several others that are in the hobby, and if you're not in a career field that makes you move all the time, one thing that I've noticed about the hobby is my father had a curio cabinet and nice glass cases where you could see the models. I bought one as soon as, I think I was in college or law school, had my own place. I bought one and put my models in it, and I have great pictures of it. It was always so cool to display it and kind of show your nerddom in a way that was very all the pretty models up front. And I've really enjoyed that. As depending on everybody's lifestyle, if you're gaming in a group, and again, I'm saying most people in the hobby probably aren't in the military, but when you're gaming in a group, it didn't take me long to go to foam boxes, foam little bags for my World War II because it was just such a pain taking it out of a curio cabinet if I wasn't playing with it as much. And so that led me to believe, like, okay, I need to make this force mobile. If I'm going to go to a club night or to a game store, I'm going to play pickup games, or I'm going to travel with an army or something. And then I think they're 27-gallon totes, and if you're in the States, you can get them at most Walmarts, Sam's Clubs, or where I get most of mine, and they have just been awesome for terrain. One of the 40-gallon ones, I put all of Stalingrad for a 28 millimeter 6x4 table fits in one, and I can wrap it in bubble wrap. I can make sure that it's safe and secure, and then I can just put it up. And okay, if I wanted to play with it at the house, I pull it out. If I'm going to move across the country, it's in a thing that keeps it pretty well secured. I've moved it several states already and never had too much damage. So I just think, regardless of your lifestyle or military service, if you're a war gamer and you're talking about I'm gonna hopefully spread the hobby and the wargaming message, or I'm going to host a game at a store, maybe at a town over or something, and you can develop a way to take terrain and that stuff securely to keep it and preserve it. It's just, you can't beat it. And so in my mind, those totes for terrain, for hobby materials, have been lifesaver.
Yeah. I had a similar experience with the first club I played in England. One of the guys, he had like the dream setup at his house. He had a whole outbuilding, concrete, cinder block, painted, plumbing, and he had these great cases on the wall, glass, like with doors and glass fronts, mirrored back with loads and loads of models, which works great if you're playing at his place because he can pull it out, put it on the table. Less so when you have to do that, as I found, like having the display and it's like, oh, I want to take these to the game, right? Go out into the tub into the car into the store, out of the tub. And it's like, if I could have just left them in the tub and then they go out of the tub onto the table, back into the tub, and it's good. Um, so yeah, having something like that, it's great to have goals and dreams if you're not as mobile as we are, or if you're able to have a home place where you play. So that's kind of more for our new players or people who might need to move, or if you suddenly find yourself in a position where you never thought you had to move and now you need to move your whole hobby collection. Those totes are really good, like Kentuckian said, really good for your terrain. And I think last kit bag, you talked about foam trays and boxes for your models. So again, that's a good one if you just find yourself, which happens, right? Life life happens, and sometimes you weren't planning on moving your collection, and now you have to.
Well, I just think
Which
it's something that it's probably one of my only pet peeves in the hobby. I don't think you can play a war game wrong, right? Like if you're having fun, like you're playing it right, painting your panther pink, it's not for me. If you love it, go forth and do great things. I may raise my eyebrow when I play it, but uh, the Amazon boxes and the cardboard boxes, bringing in I see 40K do that a lot with these hundreds of dollars of models and just throwing them on top of each other. You have a great story. I'll let you tell that here soon about havoc happening with some of those at a con. But like, I just you're going to spend so much time on this thing. You're going to do whatever you're going to do. I know the hobby is discretionary income, right, for most of us, and in my mind it's like, okay, I'll spend some bucks to preserve that, right, to not
yeah,
break as many rifles, to magnetize things, to do that. And I get it, do whatever you've got the financial stability to do. But for me, I won't I'll try not to buy other armies or anything unless I have ways to, hey, I can protect it, preserve it, and keep it alive. That doesn't always happen, but I'll at least make an attempt and an effort. But go ahead and tell us about your
Yeah.
cardboard
Yeah.
box story.
Yeah, at the recent convention where I was running the Stone Age game, uh, there was a 40K tournament, and some guys had pretty nice transport case setups and everything for their armies. But there was a guy who had all his stuff and an Amazon box in one hand with a bunch of big creatures and vehicles that I don't know if he's planning on using their extra, but as cardboard does, it stresses and it gives out over time. And as he was walking, the box collapsed and these things spilled on the floor from like chest height. And I'm just like, oh my. Like I don't care that it's 40K. Like my heart goes out to any gamer whose stuff does that. And it's like, especially as expensive that stuff is, it's like, really, you're not going to invest in at least a tub, a plastic tub just to put it all in, even if you're just piling them in that. Like,
Yeah, these huge ones
protect
are
your
seven
hobbies.
dollars. Yeah, you can get a lot of the low profile ones. You can get five of them for like $20. I don't know.
It, yeah, I mean, maybe like Kentuckian said, it's discretionary income, but it is definitely worth instead of buying the next new army to make sure the army you've got has a safe way to transport to and from the store.
Protect your
I think
investment. Yeah.
it is a worthy investment. But that's all I think we got for kickbag. Kentucky, you want to start us off with scouting report?
Scouting report tomorrow. This is at the tail end of June. We've got a good episode for July. I'm not going to talk about that on here, but you will be, especially if you're in the convention scene, you will want to stand by, and it should be coming out early to mid July, and it's going to be awesome. We're going to talk. It's going to be. We've got a really special guest for that one. The My 6 month league that I run about every year, especially if you've been following the Fightin Kentuckian page. I just do slow grow leagues anywhere I go with the military. It's awesome. Done it in multiple states, countries, and I've really enjoyed it. And it's been fun, a way to connect and meet gamers and paint, slow grow, get people either into the hobby or build new armies if they're even in the game system with bolt action. We're ending our 6 month league tomorrow. It will be the awards and the trophy ceremony here at the Forge in Charlottesville. And there's a great community here that's kind of connected, and they've got tournaments and everything's lined up. So I'm really just looking forward to that. It's awesome. I posted the Armies on Parade pictures the other day. We have some amazing painters in this group, and I'm just always impressed. Not everybody. You'll see my leagues. I'm not too stickler about it. It is a casual, like fun league. We give out trophies for best painted, best theme, best minor nation, best allied access, best sportsmanship. For 6 months, you really get to know people and who's the jerk in the group. I never get votes for. No, I'm kidding. For sportsmanship, but it's been fun. And then we do logistic points. Like how many things are you going to be able to build? Like so that way we have a lot of people coming from different things that they really enjoy about the hobby, and the culmination of that happening tomorrow is just going to be really awesome to see, and it'll be a lot of fun. The My hobby desk, you saw I got 4 units. My goal was to get to Bunker Hill. We were going to try to do Bunker Hill sometime this summer, and I've got about a third to a half of Bunker Hill's British painted, and it's something I'm going to stick with. But my hobby desk is clear. It's just got a bunch of paint on it right now. I didn't get through the Fallschirmjäger I wanted to. I didn't get through the Pyrrhic army I wanted to by the summer. My work-life balance, exams and everything increased, leaving here with another graduate degree, so that's awesome. But it just kicked up there at the end, and I couldn't get to it. Talk to Wyndehurst. I'm going to hopefully start, if I get another league going this fall, I'll start back on the Fallschirmjäger, and I'll just stay with that army to try to get them done. The Pyrrhic army I'm really excited about. I've got some Romans I got to finish off, just 2 cav units, but I'm feeling the American Eagle screeching in the background. I really want to get to that Bunker Hill, and I feel like once you get a painting style, you guys know how it is. I'm sure if you're a wargamer, you're a hobbyist, you're out there, you paint on a project, you get it going, you get sidetracked, and if you didn't write down the colors, you forget your techniques and how you got this stuff. And so even while I'm traveling, I'm going to try to keep my Bunker Hill stuff out, and I'm going to try to just stay with that like once a week. So we'll see. I've got a few cases lined up where I can take that with me as I'm going back into the Midwest and the Southeast, and we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I'd say the last thing on my scouting report is I connected with a group in Leavenworth that is seems to be solely dedicated to historical wargaming. They seem like a great group of people. They have a Facebook group. Um, I think it's like Leavenworth Historical Gamers. I know they're really busy, but I got an email, Leavenworth City Miniature Tactics Gaming Club, and I got an email back today. I'm really looking forward to that. They're talking about a Napoleonic campaign, so I'm getting fired up. That'll be super awesome. But I'm my last thing I'll end on, because I can drone, is uh, going through the totes, and just like I said in the post the other day, and seeing face to face with unpainted miniatures. And I've got a lot of painted armies, but being face to face with that, I told Wyndehurst, I was like, this next year, and especially when we get to the end of this year right now, my goal is to, get some of these armies produced. I want every hobbyist, especially maybe if they're in their painting stage right now, to ask themselves, like, how many armies or miniatures can you paint a year? And like, what's a goal to get by the end of the year? And so I'm not going to say what I said right now, but I've got a goal for, Christmas of 26, what I'll have. And I'm hoping to make a huge dent in that. So we'll see. But that's on my, that's my 50 meter and that's my 300-meter target. And I look forward to reporting back to you guys on getting none of it done and being the average war gamer and buying a bunch of extra gray plastic and having it show up at my house and crying in shame. But go ahead, Wyndehurst. I'll kick it to you.
Yeah. Uh, let's see. So things have been kind of busy. When I had the flu right after that, I got a new position at work that I had kind of been really hoping to get. But the circumstances when I get it were not ideal. I was basically taking over a failed program. So it meant I was quite busy mentally for a few weeks there and not a lot of motivation afterward to hobby. So I have not gotten as much done recently as I'd like. I am starting to kind of feel the hobby mojo coming back and getting to it. Our bolt action leagues kind of stalled because quite a few members went out of town over the last month or so. So I think everyone is still wanting to finish it. So once we kind of recoalesce everyone kind of back here in the next month or two, we'll pick it back up. We've only got 2 rounds left to do, but I think that's kind of our goal. On the hobby desk, I'm kind of at a point where I'm not 100% sure on what project I really want to put effort into, like to get to finish. So my Australians, I'm going to finish because I need those for the league. My goal by the end of the year is to have assembled the entirety of my Greek Syracuse army. And then, so that's all done. I have it all laid out, make sure I've got everything, and then I can just paint on it as I want. And then how much AWI stuff I'm going to get done for our whatever our next game is going to look like. But having gotten out my French and Indian War stuff and kind of seeing that project's probably around 50 to 60% complete if I include stuff that I rebased but didn't finish rebasing. I'm kind of feeling, and I really enjoyed the set of rules we played, and so I might put that project on the desk and be like, all right, here's one that in the short term I can probably finish, and I'm kind of motivated about it.
This is my quick plug in the middle of that. As soon as you watch Young Washington, you are going to be doing nothing but
Oh
French and
yeah.
Indian War.
Well, I don't get to go see it early, get pre-release like somebody.
My family for Father's Day got me that, and I just want to do the plug right now. That movie, regardless of your worldview, is awesome. And I say that because I profess to be a Christian. I know it's made by Angel Studios, but when I posted about it, somebody said like, "Well, it's by this right wing studio." No, if you're secular or not, like you will enjoy. I remember just me and Wyndehurst to talk about. That's one of our favorite periods, that we share in common. And Last of the
Good point.
Mohicans is a great movie, but and there's some other movies that are tangential and that will have some decent fight scenes and stuff and of the period. But that movie, um, they had a few historians talk about it on YouTube. They have like a 40-minute video about how historically accurate it is. I just advise people to watch it if you're suspect of Washington and the Crimson Coat. But as far as action, fighting, and overall character arc of Washington, I thought it was just really well done, and I highly advise anybody to go see it. And I'm telling you, as soon as you do, you'll want to pick up muskets and tomahawks.
And we're the first who will throw shade at a military movie for gross historical inaccuracies.
Thousand
Like,
percent.
we still might enjoy it, but we'll be right up there saying, yeah, historically this was trash. Um,
Napoleon, for example.
but with that, once Kentuckian gets settled, we're going to be about 10 hours apart from each other, which is the closest we've been in probably 4 years.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So hopefully, fingers crossed, in the next either maybe not by the end of 26, but certainly in 27, we'll be meeting up for some games and looking at the long term. We really want, if life allows it, to meet up at some cons.
Maybe
Um,
host some games. Maybe
yeah,
get back to our Syracuse smack talk. Who
yeah,
knows? Who knows?
and but to go to some cons as the On Patrol podcast, and whether that's hosting games or just doing like a review of the con or something, but we'd like to get out there. So if that's something, if you'd like to see us somewhere, or if there's a con that is somewhere in the Midwest that we're not aware of, there is
Little
a,
Wars.
well, there's also a big wargaming convention in, I think, September in Sioux Falls, which is about halfway between the two of us. Um, I'm going to go. I don't think Kentucky will be settled enough to do it this year. I've got an invite from one of the guys who was at the convention here. He was actually running the 40K tournament and really liked my setup and said, "Can you please come out and run some games?" I don't know the name of the con off the top of my head because I just learned about it, but I'll go check it out, and it might be something we meet halfway and run something there. But we'd like, now that we're as close as we're probably going to be for a little while, we'd like to do some stuff together and then
Yeah,
hopefully be out amongst the community as well.
for sure.
And Kentuckian's always saying, he's like, when are we going to start doing some after action report videos and stuff? So we have to be near each other really, or else we're going to have to do some remote videos, which we have talked about looking into. So we'll see. But yeah, I think that's all I've got. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. It was kind of a unique one for us. We've not really talked about our games, and it's not really a rules review, though we had the opportunity to play a unique set of rules. We're not really talking details about a historical battle, but really just kind of the journey of getting there. Um, Kentucky, I'll kick it to you if you have any last parting shots before I sign us off.
Really enjoying the posts on patrol from the community. DB Paints is crushing it. I've
Some
watched a
bear
bunch of
scenes.
his yeah, I watched a bunch of his videos. Go check out his page. He's awesome as a great. He does a bunch of tillage solo battle reports right now, and they're really interesting. It's a great set of rule set we've talked about getting into. But yeah, Jeff posted a bunch of stuff that he's starting on right now with his AWI French and Indian stuff. So keep posting your painting progress. We've got some viewers in the UK that are doing that and around the globe. And it's always, that motivates me when I see
Same.
people like going for it and regardless of where they're at in their journey of painting and refining themselves, or if they're just like, look, I'm tabletop standard and that's it. It's awesome. Like I'm normally impressed and I'm like, oh, that's so cool. Or it's a period I didn't think about. And it's really just interesting to see everybody's work. So keep that up. We just love the feedback. We've had a lot of PMs and stuff there where we talk to people in the community, but we want to engage as many people as we can. And we just like hearing different voices. So if you are somebody that sends us the PMs, we love them. Great, keep doing that. For other, people or even the people that are sending us PMs, like comment on Patrol. Let's get people involved in the conversation. Because what are you working on? What have you played? What scenarios and rule sets do you have? And I'm just challenging, people out there. Please post, what's a scenario that you brought to life that maybe it's been gamed a lot. Maybe you think you refined it enough, or maybe you pick something, whether we said it was like local family member or pivotal action, or whether it's grand scale, whatever. I'd like to see that, and we want to do a lot more of these episodes throughout the year where maybe once a quarter or something where we're talking about how did you bring this to life. We really enjoy people's thought processes on that and like how they got into it. And again, we said from the onset we like to collaborate in historical wargaming, and me and Wyndehurst find ourselves as the sometimes we're the painters, sometimes we're the researchers, sometimes we're the gamer, and we like to see like other people's influences and impacts and things that have worked, things that haven't, and just lessons learned so we can grow and develop as well. And as always, give us the criticisms. What do you not like? If you're the I won't say long beard, long tooth person that's like, I would never let Hamilton's soldiers fire. Like I've given 2 tours of that area, and I know, cool story, man. That's interesting. But let me know. Let me know other thoughts about it, or if you did game it and you wanted to be totally true, how would you pull it off and make it a fun game? But that's all I have. I look forward to commenting and interacting with you guys. The next time you hear from us, America will have already celebrated its 250th birthday. Ungrateful colonials to British listeners out there. And just look forward to digging more into the hobby once I get settled in the Midwest. And yeah, I truly appreciate the conversation. And I look forward to the pictures and comments.
Thanks, Kentuckian. And we don't say this very often, but if you genuinely enjoy our content, please share it, or like, what as they say, like and subscribe, hit the bell. Um, we do this for the community. That's the whole reason we started the podcast, was because we wanted to help grow the community. And so if you think we're doing a good job, then help help get us out there. If you don't, fine. If we're just background noise while you're painting, that's fine. But if you feel like we've had a topic that you think is useful or helpful for people, please put it out there and share. All that stuff helps with the algorithm and all that kind of things. Um, and why not? But without further ado, grab your sword and your shield, your musket and your belt-fed machine gun, and join us on the next On Patrol. Dismissed.